Tonight, you don't need to stay awake to learn, you only need to listen. Long before kings ruled Britain, before castles rose from stone, there was a quiet figure in the forests, watching, waiting, knowing what was yet to come. His name was Merlin, and this is his entire story. Welcome to SomniChron, where ancient legends are told slowly, gently, and designed to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. Tonight's story is the complete legend of Merlin, the wild prophet, the royal advisor, and the quiet force behind the rise of King Arthur. You don't need to remember every detail. Just let the story unfold and allow your thoughts to soften as the night goes on. Before we continue, I invite you to take a small, simple action, one that truly helps this channel grow. If this story helps you relax, if it helps you sleep even a little better tonight, please tap like and subscribe. It tells YouTube that calm stories like this belong here, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me just one word. Awake if you're listening closely, or sleepy. If you're already starting to drift, I read every comment, and your word helps shape future stories on this channel. Now, let's begin. Long before Merlin was known as a wizard of kings, before stone halls and golden crowns, he belonged to the forest. In those ancient days, Britain was a quieter place, shaped by wind, rain, and wandering paths beneath towering trees. The forest stretched endlessly, dark and alive, a place where the boundary between the human world and something older grew thin. It was here that the earliest memory of Merlin began, not as a powerful advisor, but as a solitary figure listening to the whispers of the land itself. He was once known as Mirrodin, a man shaped by loss and war, driven away from the noise of battle into the deep green silence. The clash of swords and the cries of fallen warriors shattered something within him, and so he fled into the wild, where no banners flew and no commands were shouted. Among the trees, his mind changed, loosening its grip on ordinary time. In this wandering madness, a strange clarity emerged. The rustling leaves spoke of what had been and what was yet to come. Birds became messengers. The wind carried truths no court would ever hear. In the forest, Mirrodin learned to be still. He watched the seasons turn without urgency, felt the slow patience of the earth beneath his feet, and understood that power did not always roar. Sometimes it waited. Sometimes it listened. Those who glimpsed him spoke of a man with unbound hair and distant eyes, murmuring to unseen companions, standing at the edge of the world as if one foot rested in tomorrow. To the people of the old kingdoms, he became both warning and wonder, a living reminder that wisdom does not always arrive clean or calm. And as the night deepened around him, the forest held his secrets, preparing him for a destiny far greater than solitude. The wild prophet did not yet know it, but his quiet exile was shaping the mind that would one day guide kings, move stones, and alter the fate of an entire realm. In the deep quiet of the forest, something within Mirrodin began to change. What others called madness slowly revealed itself as a different way of seeing. His thoughts no longer followed straight lines but moved like water, flowing around moments in time rather than through them. Past and future softened, blending into a single, endless present. In this state, visions came to him not as sudden shocks, but as gentle impressions, as if the world itself were remembering aloud. He saw events before they happened, not in sharp detail, but as feelings and symbols. A shadow moving across the land, a crown resting where it did not yet belong. Blood spilled for reasons not yet spoken. These visions did not frighten him. They arrived with a strange calm, as though the forest was simply sharing what it already knew. Mirrodin learned that the earth carries memory, and that those who listen closely can hear echoes of what is coming. Word of the wild prophet spread slowly, carried by travelers and whispered by villagers who had crossed his path. Some said he warned of storms before clouds appeared. Others claimed he spoke names of children not yet born. To most, he remained a distant legend, a figure half human and half story. But to those who listened carefully, it was clear that something ancient had awakened within him, a gift tied not to books or rituals, but to the deep rhythms of the natural world. As the nights passed and the forest breathed around him, Mirrodin no longer wandered aimlessly. He waited. The visions had begun to turn outward, pointing beyond the trees toward roads he had not yet walked. A greater purpose was forming, slow and inevitable, like dawn pressing gently against the dark. As the years passed, the forest no longer felt like a refuge alone. It became a threshold. Mirrodin sensed the pull of the world beyond the trees, a quiet pressure guiding him toward roads shaped by human feet and human choices. The visions that once drifted through his thoughts now carried direction. They spoke of towers rising and falling, of kings who ruled without wisdom, and of a land trembling under the weight of its own future. The forest itself seemed to release him. Paths appeared where none had been before, and the birds that once circled him in silence now flew ahead, as if leading the way. Mirrodin understood that solitude had taught him how to listen, but his gift was not meant to remain hidden. The knowledge he carried belonged to the land and its people, even if they did not yet know his name. Beyond the trees, Britain struggled. Kingdoms fractured, leaders fought for power, and fear settled into villages like cold mist. Mirrodin felt these troubles as distant echoes, each one tugging at the thread of fate he now held. The future pressed forward, patient but unyielding, and it was clear that the forest had prepared him for what came next. So, with slow steps and an unhurried heart, the wild prophet turned toward the world of men. He did not seek glory or recognition. He followed the pull of necessity, unaware that this quiet departure marked the beginning of a legend that would outlive stone and crown alike. Not all legends begin in light. Some begin quietly, behind stone walls and whispered prayers, where the world is hushed and watchful. Merlin's birth came not with celebration, but with uncertainty, in a place meant for silence and devotion. His mother was young and alone, living within the safety of a religious house, far from courts and battlefields. When the child arrived, there was no name to give the father, only questions that no one could answer. From the beginning, the child seemed different. His eyes followed movement too closely, lingering as if they understood more than they should. The women who cared for him spoke softly around his cradle, sensing something unusual without knowing why. It was said that storms gathered on the night of his birth, clouds pressing low as if the sky itself leaned closer to listen. Whether this was truth or memory shaped by fear, no one could say, but the feeling remained. This child had not arrived by ordinary means. Whispers spread beyond the walls. A fatherless child carried weight in a world that believed bloodlines shaped destiny. Some feared the unknown source of his existence, while others felt an unspoken awe. His mother, though frightened, protected him fiercely, holding to faith and silence as shields against suspicion. She could not explain what she herself did not understand, only that her son felt marked by something older than judgment. And so, Merlin entered the world quietly, wrapped not in prophecy yet, but in shadow and unanswered questions. The land did not tremble. No crown shifted. But something had begun, a subtle turning of fate that would one day echo across kingdoms. As the days passed, it became clear that this child did not move through time the way others did. He watched the world with quiet intensity, his gaze steady and alert, as if listening for something beneath ordinary sound. Those who cared for him noticed how rarely he cried, how calmly he rested, and how his eyes followed voices with unusual focus. It was unsettling, not because of anything he did, but because of what he seemed to understand. Then, far sooner than expected, he spoke. Not in broken sounds or simple calls, but in clear words that startled the room into silence. His voice was soft, yet certain, carrying a calm that felt out of place in such a small body. He answered questions no one remembered asking aloud and corrected statements with gentle confidence. Those who heard him felt a chill not of fear but of awe, as if they were standing too close to something powerful. News of the child spread quickly. In a world shaped by signs and omens, such behavior could not be ignored. Some believed him blessed, touched by divine insight. Others whispered darker possibilities, uneasy with knowledge that appeared without learning. His mother listened to these voices in silence, torn between fear for her son and a deep, unshakable certainty that he was meant for something beyond her understanding. The child himself seemed untroubled. He spoke when it was necessary and remained quiet when it was not, as though guided by an inner rhythm. Even then, the gift that would define Merlin's life was already present, the ability to see, to know, and to wait. The world was not yet ready for him, but it was already beginning to turn in his direction. Far from the quiet place of Merlin's childhood, a troubled king struggled to secure his rule. King Vortigern, ruler of a fractured land, sought to build a great tower as a symbol of his authority. Stone by stone, his workers labored through the day, only to return each morning to find the walls collapsed into rubble. No matter how deep the foundations were laid, the tower refused to stand. Fear crept into the king's court. Advisors whispered of curses and unseen forces, of a land unwilling to accept its ruler. Desperate for answers, Vortigern turned to his court magicians, men skilled in ritual and display. They studied signs, cast lots, and declared that the tower demanded a sacrifice, the blood of a child born without a father. Only then, they claimed, would the ground be satisfied. The search began at once, spreading through villages and sacred houses alike. When word reached Merlin's home, the truth of his birth could no longer remain hidden. The child was taken, not in chains, but under heavy silence, his mother's fear echoing behind him as the world beyond opened suddenly and without mercy. Merlin, still young, observed everything with steady eyes. He felt no panic, only recognition. The pull he had known since birth was guiding him now, drawing him toward a moment long foretold. As he was brought before the king, the falling tower loomed behind them, waiting not for blood but for truth. When Merlin was brought before King Vortigern, the court expected fear or confusion. Instead, the child stood calmly, his gaze drifting toward the unfinished tower as if he had already seen its end. Before the king could speak, Merlin gently questioned the wisdom of sacrifice, his voice steady and unafraid. He told them the ground did not hunger for blood, but hid a secret beneath its surface, one the king's magicians had failed to see. At Merlin's urging, the foundations were dug deeper. Stone and soil were pulled away until dark water shimmered below, still and hidden. Beneath that water, two great forces stirred. When the earth was opened fully, two dragons rose, one red, one white, locked in endless struggle. Their movements shook the ground, and with every clash, the tower above had fallen. Merlin explained what the others could not. The white dragon, he said, symbolized the foreign powers pressing into the land, while the red dragon stood for the people of Britain themselves. Though the white dragon seemed stronger at first, the red would one day rise and prevail. The vision spoke not only of the tower, but of the fate of the kingdom itself. The court fell silent. The king, shaken by the truth revealed by a child, spared Merlin's life and kept him close. In that moment, the boy without a father became something more, a voice of destiny. The tower was rebuilt on solid ground, and Merlin's path shifted forever, leading him away from childhood and into the shadowed halls of power. Merlin remained at the king's court, not as a prisoner, but as a quiet presence no one fully understood. Though still young, he moved through stone halls with calm confidence, observing more than he spoke. Courtiers watched him carefully, unsure whether to fear him or seek his favor. Some bowed their heads in respect, others turned away, uneasy with a child who seemed to know their thoughts before they were spoken. King Vortigern consulted Merlin often, asking about omens, enemies, and the shifting loyalties of the land. Merlin answered when truth demanded it and stayed silent when questions were shaped by fear rather than wisdom. He did not flatter the king, nor did he comfort him with false hope. His words were measured, arriving slowly, like stones placed carefully to support a fragile structure. At night, Merlin wandered the edges of the court, gazing at the stars from open terraces and listening to the wind slide between towers. The forest had taught him patience, and the court was teaching him consequence. Here, every word carried weight, every choice rippled outward. He began to understand that prophecy alone was not enough. Knowledge needed guidance, and power without restraint led only to ruin. Though surrounded by people, Merlin remained inwardly solitary. He was no longer the wild prophet of the forest, yet he did not belong fully among kings. He stood between worlds, watching fate gather itself, aware that greater changes were already on the horizon. As Merlin settled into life at court, his visions deepened. They no longer came only in quiet moments of stillness, but arrived unbidden, woven into the rhythm of daily life. While nobles debated power and territory, Merlin saw fields left empty and villages burning in futures yet unrealized. The land itself appeared to him as wounded, fractured by fear and ambition, waiting for hands steady enough to guide it toward healing. He saw rulers rise and fall like shadows at dusk, their reigns brief and uncertain. The crown passed too easily between unworthy hands, and each exchange weakened the fragile unity of the realm. These visions weighed heavily on him, not as fear, but as responsibility. Knowing what might come created a quiet urgency, a sense that delay carried its own dangers. Merlin shared these truths sparingly. Too much knowledge unsettled those who heard it, and prophecy offered without wisdom could become its own curse. Instead, he spoke in images and symbols, allowing others to reach understanding at their own pace. Some listened. Others dismissed him, clinging to comfort rather than truth. Merlin learned then that seeing the future did not grant control over it. Each night, as the court slept, Merlin returned inward, grounding himself in the stillness he had learned in the forest. He understood now that his path was not simply to predict ruin, but to shape possibility. Somewhere ahead lay a turning point, a moment where choice could alter fate. And Merlin waited, patient as ever, for the moment to arrive. King Vortigern's reign did not end in sudden violence, but in slow unraveling. Distrust spread through his court like a quiet fog, and alliances weakened as fear replaced loyalty. Merlin watched this decline with steady acceptance, knowing that some endings could not be prevented, only endured. The king who had once sought wisdom now avoided it, surrounding himself with voices that told him what he wished to hear rather than what he needed to know. As threats pressed in from beyond the borders, Vortigern's grip on power slipped further. His decisions grew hurried, shaped by desperation rather than foresight. Merlin spoke when he could, warning of paths that led only to loss, but the king no longer listened. The court felt colder, its halls echoing with uncertainty, and even the stones seemed to sense the coming change. When Vortigern finally fell, his rule fading into memory, the kingdom did not find peace. Instead, it fractured further, left without a center strong enough to hold it together. Merlin understood that the land was clearing space, making room for something new. The fall of one king was not the end of the story, but the quiet preparation for another, yet unseen. With the fall of the king, Merlin stepped back from the center of the court. He did not rush to attach himself to the next ruler, nor did he attempt to guide events openly. Instead, he watched. The land was in motion, and Merlin understood that forceful intervention would only disturb the fragile balance forming beneath the chaos. Some changes required patience rather than prophecy. From the edges of power, Merlin observed new leaders rise, each carrying their own ambitions and fears. Few were prepared to bear the weight of the crown, and fewer still possessed the humility needed to listen. Merlin spoke rarely now, offering guidance only when it could take root. He had learned that wisdom delivered too early often went unheard. The future pressed gently but persistently against the present. Merlin sensed a greater figure approaching, not yet visible but unmistakable in the patterns unfolding across the land. Roads converged, alliances shifted, and chance encounters carried unusual weight. Fate was gathering itself, slow and deliberate, like a tide returning to shore. In the quiet between reigns, Merlin remained steady. He was no longer merely reacting to visions, but aligning himself with their rhythm. The time of watching would soon give way to action, and when that moment arrived, the course of Britain would change forever. With the crown left empty, Britain drifted into uncertainty. Lords guarded their borders, alliances weakened, and old rivalries resurfaced like cracks in stone. Without a single ruler to bind the land together, fear settled quietly into everyday life. Villages listened for rumors instead of bells, and travelers moved cautiously, unsure which banner ruled which road. The kingdom existed, but it no longer felt whole. Merlin moved through this fractured realm unseen, listening more than speaking. He sensed the strain beneath the surface, the land itself longing for order. Power sought a center, and without one, it scattered into restless fragments. Merlin knew that leadership could not simply be claimed. It had to be recognized, accepted, and supported by something deeper than ambition. In the silence between conflicts, signs began to appear. A comet burned briefly across the night sky, shaped like a blazing dragon, and people paused to watch it fade. Whispers followed. Old symbols stirred in memory, and ancient meanings resurfaced. Merlin saw in this moment not chaos, but opportunity. The land was ready, and somewhere nearby, a figure was stepping forward to meet it. On a clear night, when the world seemed briefly at rest, the sky itself changed. A blazing shape tore across the darkness, its tail stretching long and bright like wings of fire. People stood in silence, drawn upward by awe and unease. To some, it was a warning. To others, a promise. To Merlin, it was neither surprise nor accident, but confirmation. The comet lingered in memory long after it vanished, its image etched into the thoughts of all who saw it. Merlin spoke quietly of its meaning, explaining that the dragon was a sign of a rising leader, one bound to the land and its ancient strength. The symbol carried weight older than kings, reaching back to the earliest stories of Britain itself. Soon after, other emerged. Strong, determined, and shaped by battle, he carried the presence of command even before he wore a crown. Merlin recognized in him the necessary fire, not perfect, but powerful enough to unite what had been divided. The dragon became his mark, and with it, his destiny took shape. The land responded. Lords began to listen. Soldiers gathered. The fractured realm leaned toward cohesion once more. And Merlin, watching from the quiet edge of events, understood that the path he had long foreseen was finally unfolding. Merlin did not choose other lightly. He observed him in moments of victory and failure, watching how he carried strength and how he responded to resistance. Other was fierce, sometimes reckless, but beneath the armor lived a will capable of holding a kingdom together. Merlin understood that no ruler arrived without flaws. What mattered was the ability to learn, to listen, and to act when the moment demanded it. When Merlin finally stepped forward, his guidance was subtle rather than commanding. He spoke of unity, of responsibility, and of the cost of power. Others listened. Unlike others before him, he did not dismiss the quiet prophet's words. He asked questions, weighed counsel, and accepted that leadership required more than force. In that exchange, a bond formed not of obedience but of purpose. With Merlin's guidance, others gathered allies and claimed the crown. The dragon became his symbol, and he took the name Pendragon, tying his rule to the land's ancient strength. Britain, weary of division, accepted him. The realm did not heal overnight, but it began to breathe again, slowly finding its balance under a new hand. Merlin watched as the king took his first steps into rule, knowing this reign was not the final answer, but a necessary passage. Others' rise was part of a greater design, one that would lead to something far beyond his own lifetime. Though Other ruled with strength, his heart was not immune to longing. In time, his attention settled upon Igraine, a woman bound by marriage to another lord. This desire grew quietly at first, then with increasing force, until it threatened the balance Merlin had helped restore. Merlin sensed the danger immediately, not only in the passion itself, but in the ripples it would send through the realm. Others' longing clouded his judgment, drawing him toward conflict. Armies gathered, loyalties strained, and the fragile peace began to waver. Merlin stood at the edge of this turning point, aware that fate often moved through flawed choices rather than noble ones. He understood that what was unfolding could not be undone, only guided. With careful thought, Merlin offered a path that would prevent open war while allowing destiny to continue its course. Through art and illusion, appearances were changed, and the night concealed truths meant to remain hidden. What followed would shape the future of Britain in ways no one present could fully comprehend. From that single night, something new was set into motion, a life conceived not only through desire, but through prophecy. Merlin knew that the consequences would echo far beyond the reign of Other Pendragon, reaching into a future where the fate of the kingdom would rest in the hands of a child, yet unnamed. The child born of that secret night did not enter the world with ceremony or claim. From the beginning, Merlin understood that greatness required protection before it required recognition. The kingdom was not ready, and enemies gathered easily around anything that shone too brightly. So the child was taken quietly from the place of his birth and carried away from court and crown. Merlin chose a simple home, far from politics and prophecy, where the rhythms of ordinary life could shape the boy's character. Here, among fields and stone walls, the child would grow without knowing the weight of his destiny. He was given a new name and raised as any other boy, learning the feel of the earth beneath his feet and the value of honest work. Laughter replaced ceremony, and routine replaced expectation. From a distance, Merlin watched. He did not interfere unless necessary, allowing the boy's nature to unfold on its own. Strength appeared early, but so did kindness. Even in childhood, the future king showed an instinct to protect others, and a quiet sense of fairness that could not be taught. Merlin knew then that the choice had been right. The kingdom's hope was growing, unseen, exactly as fate required. The boy grew in quiet strength, shaped not by prophecy but by daily life. He learned to rise early, to tend animals, to listen before speaking. There were no songs sung of his birth, no reminders of who he would become. Instead, there were simple lessons: how to stand firm, how to help without being asked, how to face mistakes without anger. These teachings settled into him gently, forming a foundation stronger than any throne. Merlin visited often, though rarely in the same form. Sometimes he appeared as a passing traveler, other times as an old friend of the household, offering small bits of guidance that felt like chance. He watched how the boy treated others, noting the ease with which he earned trust. There was leadership in him already, quiet and unforced, drawing people close rather than commanding them. As seasons passed, the boy's skill with sword and horse grew, but never overshadowed his sense of restraint. Victory did not harden him, and loss did not embitter him. Merlin recognized this balance as rare and precious. The future king was learning the most difficult lesson of all: power carried best when it is not sought. Beyond the fields, the kingdom continued to struggle. Rulers rose and fell, each reign leaving the land more uncertain than the last. And still, the boy remained unknown, growing steadily into the role he did not yet realize awaited him. When the old king died and the land once again stood leaderless, Merlin knew the moment had arrived. Britain could no longer endure uncertainty. So he prepared a test, not of strength alone, but of rightful belonging. In the heart of the city, he set a sword within a stone, its hilt rising clean and simple, marked only by a quiet promise. Whoever could draw the blade free would be recognized as the true king. People gathered from every corner of the realm. Knights with hardened arms tried and failed. Lords strained with pride and frustration, each convinced the crown was theirs to claim. The sword did not move. It waited, untouched by force or desire, responding to something deeper than effort. The boy came without intention. He had not come to compete, only to assist someone else. When his hand closed around the hilt, there was no strain, no moment of triumph. The blade slid free as if it had never been bound at all. Those who witnessed it fell into stunned silence. Merlin stepped forward then, calm and certain, announcing what fate had long prepared. The land responded immediately. Resistance faded into recognition. What strength could not achieve, belonging had. And in that simple motion, the boy became king. The revelation did not settle all doubts at once. Some questioned the boy's right, others his youth, but the truth carried its own quiet weight. The sword had answered clearly, and no argument could undo that moment. Merlin guided the new king gently through the storm of voices, reminding the court that authority was not seized, but recognized. Slowly, resistance softened into acceptance. The crown was placed not as a burden but as a responsibility. The young king stood without fear, meeting the eyes of those before him with calm resolve. He did not boast, nor did he hesitate. In that stillness, the court felt something rare: hope. Not loud or dramatic, but steady and grounded, like the first light of morning, Merlin watched closely as the king spoke his first words of rule. They were simple promises, shaped by fairness and duty rather than ambition. In that moment, Merlin knew the long path he had walked had reached its purpose. The boy he had hidden, protected, and guided was ready to lead. As the hall slowly emptied and night settled once more, Merlin stepped back into shadow. His work was not finished, but its foundation was set. The kingdom had its king, and a new chapter was beginning. With the crown upon his head, the young king found himself surrounded by expectation. The throne stood solid beneath him, yet its weight was unfamiliar. Every decision echoed beyond the hall, shaping lives he could not see. Merlin remained nearby, never commanding, always present, a quiet shadow at the edge of the king's vision. His role was no longer to reveal destiny, but to help guide it gently into being. The king listened carefully, learning when to speak and when silence carried greater strength. Merlin offered counsel in calm moments, choosing words with care. He taught that ruling was not about control but balance, not about force but understanding. Power, Merlin reminded him, was most dangerous when it forgot its purpose. Together, they walked the early days of the reign. Merlin observed how the king treated friend and rival alike, noting his patience and restraint. The court began to change, slowly mirroring the tone set by its ruler. Where fear had once ruled, steadiness took hold. The throne no longer felt empty or fragile. It felt rooted. As the king's rule settled into rhythm, a place was chosen to become the heart of the realm. Camelot did not rise in haste. Stone by stone, it took form with intention, guided by Merlin's understanding of both land and balance. He chose the site carefully, where roads met and the earth itself felt steady, a place meant to gather people rather than divide them. Camelot was not built to intimidate. Its halls were open, its spaces designed for conversation and counsel rather than isolation. Merlin shaped its design subtly, ensuring that light moved freely and voices carried clearly. The court that gathered there felt different from those before it. Pride softened. Rivalries cooled. Something about the place encouraged honesty, as though the walls themselves listened. The king ruled from Camelot with growing confidence. Surrounded by trusted allies and guided by Merlin's steady counsel, he learned how to weigh justice against mercy. Decisions became thoughtful rather than reactive. The land responded in kind. Trade returned. Roads grew safer. Stories spread of a court where fairness mattered more than fear. Merlin watched Camelot breathe to life, knowing this was more than a city. It was a symbol, not of power alone, but of what power could become when guided by wisdom. The foundation was laid, and with it, the promise of a golden age. As Camelot grew, word spread across the land of a different kind of court. Knights came not only for reward, but for purpose. They arrived from distant regions, carrying varied loyalties and past grievances, yet drawn by the same quiet promise. The king welcomed them openly, judging not by lineage alone but by conduct and intent. Merlin observed each arrival with careful attention. He saw strength in some, restraint in others, and in a few, a depth of character that marked them as something more. He understood that unity could not be forced among such powerful individuals. It had to be shaped. The old hierarchies of precedence and rivalry would only fracture what was forming. To guide this fellowship, Merlin proposed a simple yet radical idea: a table without a head. In this circle, no knight would sit above another. All would face one another as equals, bound by shared responsibility rather than rank. The king agreed, recognizing the wisdom in this balance. As the knights gathered around the round table for the first time, something shifted. Competition gave way to respect. Voices softened. A bond began to form, not through command, but through shared purpose. Merlin watched quietly, knowing this fellowship would become the heart of the realm's strength. The round table changed how the knights spoke and how they listened. No one sat higher. No voice carried more weight by position alone. Each knight faced the others equally, reminded that strength without humility served no one. Merlin watched as pride slowly loosened its hold, replaced by something steadier and more enduring. The king led these gatherings not as a commander, but as a participant. He listened as often as he spoke, allowing wisdom to surface from many places. Merlin offered guidance sparingly, shaping discussion with gentle insight rather than authority. In this balance, decisions were made carefully, shaped by collective understanding rather than impulse. Over time, trust grew. Disputes were settled with words instead of blades. The fellowship learned that unity did not erase difference but gave it direction. Each knight carried their own strengths, yet none stood alone. Camelot became known not just as a seat of power, but as a place where honor mattered. As night fell on the first true gathering of the Round Table, Merlin felt a quiet satisfaction. The foundation he had envisioned was holding. The king was no longer alone, and the realm had found its center. Merlin's magic did not come from spoken spells or grand displays. It flowed from understanding of the land, the sky, and the quiet laws that bound them together. He listened to the world the way others listened to voices, sensing movement beneath stillness and change within repetition. To Merlin, the earth was alive, and power came from knowing how to move with it rather than against it. When he worked, it was subtle. Stones shifted where they needed to rest. Winds arrived when they were most useful. The change often went unnoticed, but its effects lingered. Those who watched closely felt a presence rather than a performance, a steady alignment of forces guided by intention. Merlin's power was not meant to dominate, only to guide what already existed. This understanding shaped everything he did. He taught the king that true magic was not control, but harmony. When order followed his guidance, it felt natural, as though it had always been meant to be. Merlin knew that the greatest power was the one that left no trace of itself behind. Merlin understood that every place carried memory. Stones remembered weight, wind remembered paths, and time itself left impressions on the land. When Merlin shaped the world, he did not force it to obey. He reminded it of what it already knew. A stone would settle because it wished to rest. A storm would pass because its purpose was complete. Those who watched Merlin work often felt confused, expecting spectacle and finding only quiet change. Yet when they returned days later, paths were clearer, structures stronger, and balance restored. His magic unfolded slowly, layered like seasons rather than moments. It was not meant to impress, but to endure. Time to Merlin was not a straight line. He sensed it folding gently over itself, moments brushing against one another like leaves in still air. This awareness allowed him to act with patience others could not understand. He waited when others rushed and spoke when silence was needed. His magic was bound to timing as much as intention. In this way, Merlin became less a wizard of fire and light, and more a keeper of alignment. The world did not bend around him. It breathed with him. Not all of Merlin's visions brought comfort. Some arrived heavy and unyielding, carrying truths that could not be softened or redirected. He saw moments that resisted intervention, events shaped by choices already set in motion. These visions did not frighten him, but they weighed upon him, reminding him that knowledge did not always grant control. Merlin learned to distinguish between futures that could be guided and those that could only be witnessed. In these moments, his role was not to act, but to prepare others gently for what lay ahead. He spoke in symbols, allowing meaning to unfold slowly, protecting minds from the full weight of what he saw. Silence, he discovered, was sometimes the most merciful response. At night, Merlin withdrew from the court, returning to quiet places where the world felt open and honest. There he grounded himself in stillness, releasing the tension of what he knew. He accepted that fate was not a single path, but a weaving of many hands, some human, some unseen. His task was not to command the weave, but to tend it carefully. With knowledge came distance. Merlin felt it slowly, a quiet separation from those around him. While others lived fully in the present, Merlin carried echoes of what had not yet happened. Laughter still reached him, but it passed through layers of awareness, softened by what he knew would follow. Wisdom, he learned, often required solitude. He did not resent this cost. Instead, he accepted it as part of the balance he served. To guide others, he had to stand apart, steady and composed, even when the future pressed heavily against him. He learned to measure his words with care, understanding that truth delivered without readiness could harm rather than help. Despite this distance, Merlin remained deeply connected to the land and its people. His compassion did not fade. It deepened. He protected quietly, corrected gently, and intervened only when necessary. His presence became a constant, reassuring force, unseen by many, but felt by all. As this chapter of his life settled into stillness, Merlin understood that magic was not his greatest burden. Knowing was. And yet, he carried it willingly, knowing that the peace of the realm depended on his restraint as much as his power. For a time, Camelot shone. The land prospered, borders held firm, and stories of fairness traveled farther than fear ever had. Yet beneath this calm surface, Merlin sensed quiet strain. Like stone weathered by years of wind, small fractures formed slowly, almost invisibly. The Golden Age did not falter all at once. It softened at the edges. Merlin noticed moments others overlooked, a hesitation before a vow. A glance held too long, a promise bent gently out of shape. None of these acts were crimes, yet together they altered the balance he had worked so carefully to maintain. The round table remained strong, but its harmony required constant tending, and even then, perfection could not last. The king continued to rule with wisdom, yet the weight of leadership pressed harder with each passing year. Decisions grew more complex, victories less clean. Merlin understood that peace itself created new challenges, inviting desire, doubt, and restlessness into places once ruled by necessity. These were not failures, but signs of change. As the days lengthened and nights grew quieter, Merlin watched patiently. The future was shifting again, not toward chaos yet, but toward something fragile. And fragility, he knew, required care more than force. Within the calm of Camelot, emotions deepened quietly. Bonds formed not only through duty but through affection and admiration. Love, when guided by honesty, strengthened the realm, but when hidden, it bent loyalties in subtle ways. Merlin sensed these shifts long before they were spoken, feeling them ripple gently through the fellowship. Some hearts carried more than one allegiance. Devotion to the king lived beside personal longing, and the balance between the two grew delicate. Merlin did not judge these feelings. He understood them as part of being human. Yet he knew that unspoken truths had a way of shaping fate without permission. The knights remained loyal, but tensions appeared in moments of silence rather than conflict. A pause before agreement. A decision delayed. Camelot still stood strong, but the harmony that once felt effortless now required care. Merlin watched closely, knowing that love, when denied clarity, could become the sharpest fracture of all. As the balance of Camelot shifted, Merlin's visions returned with greater urgency. They no longer arrived as clear paths, but as symbols layered with meaning. Dreams carried images of cracked stone, dimmed firelight, and circles slowly pulling apart. These signs were not sudden disasters, but quiet warnings, urging care where confidence had grown too comfortable. Merlin shared these visions carefully, choosing moments when minds were open and hearts unguarded. He spoke of vigilance, of honesty, of the dangers of leaving truths unspoken. Some listened and reflected. Others heard only echoes, unable to connect symbol to consequence. Merlin understood this resistance. The future is hardest to accept when it asks for restraint rather than action. At night, he lingered in still places, allowing the visions to settle without urgency. He knew that fate rarely announced itself loudly. It moved through suggestion, through small choices made repeatedly. His role was not to frighten the court with prophecy, but to remind it gently of the cost of ignoring balance. As the warnings faded into routine, a quiet settled over Camelot. It was not peace, but pause, a stillness filled with unspoken choices. Conversations grew polite but guarded, and truths lingered just beneath the surface, waiting for courage that did not always arrive. Merlin felt this silence deeply, understanding that what was left unsaid often carried more weight than open conflict. The court continued its rituals, councils met, and the round table gathered as it always had. Yet something subtle had changed. The harmony that once flowed naturally now required effort to maintain. Merlin did not intervene. He knew that moments like this could not be forced open. They had to break on their own. In private, Merlin accepted what he could not prevent, Some futures could only unfold, shaped by love, fear, and human choice. He remained present, steady, and watchful, offering balance where he could and silence where he must. The calm before the fall was not empty. It was heavy with consequence. As night settled over Camelot, Merlin stood beneath the stars, feeling the slow turn of fate once more. The Golden Age had not ended yet, but it was preparing to change. Betrayal did not arrive as a single act. It grew quietly, nourished by silence and unresolved longing. Trust weakened where honesty should have lived, and loyalties stretched thin under the weight of divided hearts. Camelot still stood proud, but beneath its strength, roots had begun to twist. Merlin sensed the change long before it showed itself. He felt it in the tightening of conversations and the careful distance between once close allies. Love, once a source of unity, now pulled against duty, creating fractures no sword could mend. Merlin did not condemn those caught in this tension. He understood that betrayal often begins not in cruelty, but in fear of truth. The king remained unaware of how deeply these divisions had settled. He trusted in the bonds he had built, believing them strong enough to endure anything. Merlin watched quietly, knowing that revelation would come, and when it did, it would shake the very foundation of the realm. The Round Table, once a symbol of unity, began to strain under the weight of unspoken truths. Knights who had once trusted one another without question now hesitated, their loyalty divided between honor and personal allegiance. Small disagreements lingered longer than they should have, and silence often replaced open counsel. The circle remained unbroken in shape, but its spirit had begun to thin. Merlin watched these changes with quiet sorrow. He had helped shape this fellowship, knowing from the beginning that it was built by human hands and human hearts. Strength and flaw had always lived side by side. Now, those flaws pressed closer to the surface. The balance that once held the circle together required more effort than ever before. When the truth finally emerged, it did not arrive gently. Trust shattered where it had once been strongest, and the harmony of Camelot faltered. The Round Table did not fall apart in a single moment, but its bond was broken. Merlin stood apart as the echoes of that fracture spread through the hall, understanding that this was not merely an end, but the beginning of a reckoning. What had once been held together by trust now strained under suspicion. Disagreements hardened into opposition, and loyalties that once aligned began to pull in different directions. The realm felt the change immediately. Messengers carried sharper words, borders grew tense, and the peace Camelot had nurtured for so long began to fracture. The king struggled to restore balance, calling councils and seeking reconciliation, but the wounds ran deeper than words could reach. Merlin stood beside him, offering what guidance he could, though he knew some divisions could not be healed once exposed. Conflict was no longer distant. It had stepped into the heart of the kingdom. As factions formed and old bonds weakened, Merlin sensed the slow inevitability of what was coming. He did not despair. He remained steady, knowing that even in collapse, meaning endured. The rise of conflict was not chaos alone, but consequence, the echo of choices made long before swords were drawn. The final battle did not come suddenly. It approached like a gathering storm, felt long before it broke. Armies moved across familiar land now marked by tension, and the air itself seemed heavy with sorrow. Brothers faced one another beneath opposing banners, each carrying memories of a time when they had fought side by side. Camelot's greatest strength had always been unity, and now that strength was turned inward. Merlin watched from a distance, knowing this moment could not be undone. The clash that followed was fierce and tragic, not because of its violence alone, but because of what it represented. The age that had been built with such care was ending by its own hand. When the battle finally fell silent, the cost was unmistakable. The king was wounded, the fellowship scattered, and the dream of Camelot lay broken upon the field. As the mist settled, Merlin felt the deep turning of time. This was not merely a defeat, but a closing. The golden age had passed into memory, joining the long line of stories shaped by hope and human frailty. And yet, even here, Merlin sensed that the story was not finished, only changed. When the battle ended and the field grew still, the king did not remain among the fallen. Wounded and fading, he was carried away from the world he had ruled, guided toward a place that existed between memory and myth. Some said he was taken to a hidden isle, where time moved differently and healing waited beyond mortal understanding. Merlin knew the truth rested somewhere beyond words. The kingdom mourned, unsure whether it had lost its king forever or merely set him aside. Merlin offered no certainty. Hope, he understood, must remain open, not confined to explanation. The idea of a king beyond the world became a quiet promise, carried gently through generations, not an ending but a waiting. As Britain adjusted to absence, Merlin felt his own path drawing inward. His role as guide and guardian was changing once more. The world no longer needed his hand at its center. The age he had shaped had passed, and what remained required distance rather than direction. With the king gone from sight, Merlin began to fade from the world he had shaped. He did not vanish suddenly, nor did he announce his leaving. Instead, he stepped back slowly, allowing silence to take the place of guidance. The halls of Camelot no longer echoed with his presence, and the paths he once walked felt quieter, as though the land itself understood. Merlin returned to the places where stillness lived most deeply. Forests welcomed him without question, and stone remembered his touch without asking for more. He no longer sought to influence events or interpret the future. His work had been to prepare, not to prevent, and that work was complete. The knowing he carried softened, settling into something closer to peace. Those who searched for him found only traces, a memory of counsel offered at the right moment, a balance restored just long enough to matter. Merlin accepted that legends must eventually release their makers. And so, with quiet resolve, he stepped fully into the space between story and silence. In the quiet beyond the world of kings, Merlin's story slowed. The urgency that once surrounded him faded, replaced by deep stillness. Some said he entered an enchanted sleep, not born of weakness, but of completion. It was a rest earned through centuries of watching, guiding, and knowing when to let go. This sleep was not an ending, but a pause outside ordinary time. Dreams moved gently around him, carrying echoes of forests, stone halls, and starlit skies. The magic he had shaped no longer needed direction. It lingered in the land itself, woven into rivers, roads, and memory. Those who believed in his return spoke quietly, without demand. They understood that wisdom cannot be summoned by force. It arrives only when the world is ready. Merlin's sleep became a symbol of patience, of trust, and of the deep rhythm that carries all stories forward. Merlin's story did not end with silence. It settled into the land, into memory, into the quiet spaces between moments. His presence remained not as a figure walking among people, but as a pattern, a reminder that wisdom often moves unseen. The choices he guided continued to echo, shaping generations who would never know his name, yet feel his influence all the same. The legend of the once and future king lived on, carried alongside the quiet promise of the wizard who had shaped that age. Not as certainty, but as possibility. When the world drifted too far from balance, when hope felt distant, the story returned, reminding listeners that renewal was always possible. And so, as night deepens and the world grows still, Merlin rests beyond time, waiting not to act but to be remembered. His tale remains unfinished, not because it lacks an ending but because it belongs to every moment that follows. Long after the age of kings and wizards passed into silence, the story remained. It lived not in stone or crown, but in quiet remembrance. Parents spoke the name Merlin in lowered voices, as if not to wake something ancient. Fires burned lower as the tale was told, and listeners felt the strange comfort of knowing that wisdom had once walked among the world. The details changed with time. Some spoke of a prophet, others of a wizard. Some remembered a man of the forest, others a figure of the court. Yet beneath every telling, the same truth remained, that guidance, when given with patience, could change the course of everything. Merlin became less a person and more a presence, woven into the shape of the land itself. As generations passed, the legend softened, becoming part of the rhythm of night and memory. It no longer demanded belief. It simply existed, waiting to be remembered when the world grew tired or uncertain. The land itself carried the story forward. Hills and forests, rivers and stone circles held traces of what had been. Travelers felt it without knowing why, a sense of familiarity in places they had never seen before. The ground remembered footsteps long faded, and the wind carried names it no longer spoke aloud. In quiet moments when the world slowed, people felt watched over rather than alone, not by a presence that demanded attention, but by something steady and enduring. Merlin's influence lingered not as magic, but as alignment, a gentle nudge toward balance that lived beneath ordinary life. Even as new ages rose and old ones fell, the land remained patient. It had seen greatness before and would see it again. The story did not fade because it was not finished. It had simply learned how to wait. The story of Merlin returns because it answers a quiet need. In moments when the world feels unbalanced, when certainty fades and direction feels distant, the legend rises again, not as instruction but as reassurance. It reminds listeners that wisdom does not shout, and that guidance often arrives softly, asking only for patience. Each generation finds its own meaning in the tale. Some hear a story about leadership. Others hear one about restraint, or about knowing when to act and when to wait. The details shift, but the core remains steady. Merlin's story endures because it adapts without losing its heart. In this way, the legend becomes a companion rather than a lesson. It walks beside those who listen, offering calm perspective rather than answers. The story returns not because it must, but because it belongs. As the story settles, it asks nothing more of you. There is no lesson to remember, no meaning to hold tightly. Like the quiet of night, it simply remains, offering rest rather than resolution. Merlin's tale becomes a place you can return to, familiar and steady, whenever the world feels too loud. The legend does not end. It softens. It drifts into the background, like distant stars fading with the approach of sleep. What matters is not the wizard, the king, or the age they lived in, but the calm that lingers after the telling, a sense that balance is possible. That time moves gently when allowed to. And so, as your breathing slows and thoughts grow lighter, the story releases you. Merlin rests. The land rests. And you are free to rest as well, carried quietly into sleep by a tale that knows when to let go. There are moments when the world slows without announcement. Streets quiet, lights dim, and even thought begins to soften at the edges. It is in these moments that stories like Merlin's linger most clearly, not as memory, but as atmosphere. The quiet watcher does not move through time as people do. He waits within stillness, present whenever awareness drifts away from urgency. This presence is not one of intervention. It does not shape events or whisper directions. Instead, it observes gently, holding space for balance to return on its own. The world does not need guidance at every moment. Sometimes it only needs patience. Merlin's role long after legend becomes this, a reminder that not all guardians are active and not all wisdom speaks. As night deepens, The watcher remains unseen, not above the world but within it. In the pause between breaths, in the space between thoughts, the story continues quietly, asking nothing and offering rest. Between one moment and the next, there is a space most people never notice. It is the pause before thought forms, the breath before movement begins. Merlin's story settles into this space, where nothing is required and nothing is expected. Here, time loosens its grip, and the mind is free to drift without direction. In this stillness, the watcher does not act. There is no future to prepare and no past to interpret. The weight of knowing dissolves into quiet awareness. Merlin is no longer prophet or wizard, but presence itself, steady, patient, and undisturbed by change. The world moves on, but this space remains. It exists wherever attention softens and urgency fades. The story rests here, not advancing, not ending, simply being. And within this calm, rest becomes natural. To watch without knowing is a rare kind of peace. It means releasing the need to understand what comes next, or why something unfolds as it does. Merlin's presence settles into this way of being, free from prophecy and expectation. The future no longer presses forward and the past no longer calls back. In this state, there is no effort. Awareness drifts gently, like light through mist, touching without holding. The watcher observes not events, but rhythm, the slow, natural movement of existence continuing on its own. Nothing is corrected, nothing is guided. Balance is trusted to return when needed. This is the final lesson of the story, offered without words. Rest does not come from answers, but from letting go of the need for them. In watching without knowing, the world and the mind find ease together. The long rest does not arrive suddenly. It unfolds slowly, like night settling over the land. Thoughts loosen their grip, memories drift without form, and awareness becomes soft and spacious. Merlin's presence fades fully into this rest, no longer watcher or guide, but part of the quiet itself. There is nothing left to hold, no future waiting to be shaped, no past asking to be understood. Time moves without urgency, carrying everything gently forward. The story no longer needs words. It exists as calm as breath, as the steady sense that all things are allowed to be as they are. And here, in this final stillness, the legend releases you completely. The watcher rests. The world rests. And you, carried by the same gentle rhythm, are free to sink into sleep, untroubled and at ease. After the long rest, there is a kind of quiet that no longer feels like silence. It is softer than stillness and deeper than calm, a state where nothing needs to be noticed. Merlin's presence does not reappear as form or thought. It remains as atmosphere, like the feeling of safety that lingers even after a door has closed. In this quiet, the mind no longer searches for story or meaning. The idea of beginning and ending loosens until it fades completely. Time no longer asks to be measured. The night holds everything gently, without edges, without expectation. This is not sleep exactly and not waking either, but the space where both rest together. The legend does not speak here. It breathes, and that is enough. Some calm fades when attention returns. This one does not. It settles deeper, becoming a background presence that asks nothing of you. Merlin's story no longer stands apart as legend or memory. It dissolves into this calm, indistinguishable from the quiet you feel when nothing is required. Thoughts may pass, but they do not linger. Sensations soften at the edges, and awareness grows wide and unhurried. The calm remains even as focus drifts, even as sleep deepens. It does not cling or pull. It simply stays in this space. Rest is no longer an action. It is a state already reached. The story has done its work, not by guiding, but by letting go. There comes a moment when effort releases itself, not because it is forced to, but because it is no longer needed. In this moment, there is nothing left to hold on to, no story, no thought, no direction. Merlin's presence becomes so subtle it no longer feels separate from your own awareness. The mind rests without instruction. It drifts naturally, like water finding its level. The idea of listening fades, replaced by gentle being. There is no need to follow or understand. Everything has already settled. This is where the story truly ends, not with a final word but with absence of weight. And in that absence, rest deepens on its own. The quiet does not end when the story does. It carries on without effort, steady and unbroken. There is nothing to return to and nothing to move toward. Awareness softens until it feels like background warmth rather than focus. Merlin's story is no longer something being told. It has become the calm itself. Breath moves easily. Time passes unnoticed. The sense of listening dissolves, replaced by rest that requires no attention. This is not an ending meant to be marked. It is a continuation meant to be felt only faintly, if at all. And so the quiet continues, uninterrupted and complete. Nothing calls you back. Nothing asks you to stay. You are already where you need to be, at the edge of rest. Thought begins to thin. It no longer forms clear shapes or questions. It moves slowly, like mist drifting across a quiet field. Merlin's presence is no longer sensed as watcher or story, but as the gentle absence of urgency. Nothing presses forward. Nothing pulls back. In this space, awareness feels wide and uncontained. Sounds soften as soon as they are noticed. Sensations fade into background warmth. The mind no longer tries to follow or hold. It simply allows. This is the horizon before nothing, where effort dissolves naturally. Here, the story offers no direction because none is needed. Rest has taken over completely. Being no longer feels like something you are doing. It feels like something that is simply happening without effort or intention. The body rests into its own weight, supported without needing to adjust. Breath moves on its own, slow and unremarkable, as natural as night settling into darkness. Merlin's story has fully dissolved into this ease, leaving behind only comfort. There is no need to check where you are or how deeply you rest. Even the idea of rest loosens and drifts away. Thoughts, if they appear at all, pass without shape or meaning like distant echoes that never reach you. The horizon remains still, wide and patient. This ease does not ask for awareness. It holds you whether you notice it or not. And within it, everything is already complete. Here, time no longer feels like a sequence. There is no sense of before or after, only a gentle continuity without direction. Moments do not pass so much as they blend, each one indistinguishable from the next. Merlin's presence, once a guide through ages, is now fully at rest within this unmoving flow. The mind does not track progress. There is nowhere to arrive and nothing to leave behind. Even memory loosens its hold, releasing names, images, and meaning. What remains is a soft awareness, barely noticeable, like warmth through closed eyes. In this still horizon, nothing changes and nothing needs to. Rest deepens without effort, carried by a rhythm older than story and quieter than thought. Nothing arrives here and nothing departs. The horizon does not move closer or farther away. It simply remains, steady and unchanging. Awareness rests within it without effort, without need for attention. Merlin's story, once filled with motion and meaning, has fully settled into this quiet permanence. There is no sense of waiting, no sense of completion, only continuation without direction. The body is held gently by stillness and the mind floats without edges. Even the idea of listening dissolves, leaving only ease. The horizon remains whether it is noticed or not, and within it, rest is complete. There is a current beneath rest, slow and steady, carrying everything without effort. You do not need to follow it or understand it. It moves on its own, deeper than thought and quieter than awareness. Merlin's presence no longer feels separate from this movement. It has become part of the current itself, flowing without direction. Thoughts no longer form clearly here. If they appear at all, they dissolve before they can be noticed. The body rests fully, supported by stillness, while the mind drifts without shape. There is no need to stay awake and no need to fall asleep. Both states blend gently into one another. This drifting is natural. Nothing is being done. Nothing is being lost. The current carries you exactly as you are. Here, nothing needs to be supported by effort. You are carried rather than held, moved gently without resistance. The sense of having a body grows distant, replaced by a feeling of floating ease. Merlin's story no longer anchors itself to form or meaning. It moves as part of this current, present without weight. There is no tension here. No need to adjust or respond. Even awareness feels optional, coming and going without consequence. The current continues whether noticed or not, steady and reliable, guiding without guidance. In this space, rest deepens naturally. There is nothing to follow and nothing to lose. You are already moving exactly where you need to be. Depth does not feel far away here. It feels close, immediate, as though it has always been present beneath the surface. There is no sense of traveling downward, no motion to notice. The deep is already here, holding everything quietly. Merlin's presence has fully merged with this depth, indistinguishable from rest itself. Awareness thins until it is barely a trace. There is no edge to reach, no center to find. The idea of distance dissolves, leaving only gentle continuity. Nothing presses forward, nothing pulls back. The deep current moves without direction, complete as it is. In this space, rest is effortless and unbroken. There is no need to recognize it. It remains whether noticed or not. The current does not end or change. It does not slow or quicken. It simply continues, steady and unbroken, carrying everything gently without intention. There is no marker to show where one moment becomes the next. The sense of progression fades, replaced by quiet continuity. Merlin's story no longer exists as story at all. It has fully become this movement without effort. Breath happens on its own. Rest holds without needing to be noticed. Even the idea of drifting softens until it disappears. What remains is calm without shape, presence without focus, ease without thought. Nothing is required and nothing is missing. The current continues whether awareness is present or not. And within it, everything rests exactly as it should. Before sleep fully arrives, there is a soft dark that settles gently around everything. It is not heavy or empty. It feels protective, like a quiet curtain drawn across the world. In this space, awareness fades without resistance. Merlin's presence is no longer sensed as watcher, current, or horizon. It rests as part of this dark, calm and complete. The mind no longer asks where it is going. It does not need to recognize the moment. Sensations blur into warmth, and even the idea of rest becomes unnecessary. Sleep has not yet claimed its name, but its shape is already here, surrounding everything gently. This is the place where nothing needs to happen for rest to deepen. The soft dark holds without effort. Thought fades without needing to be quieted. It simply loosens and slips away, leaving behind a gentle comfort where nothing forms and nothing is missing. The mind rests in this absence as naturally as the body rests in stillness. Merlin's story has fully dissolved into this comfort, no longer something remembered or followed. There is no effort to stay aware and no effort to let go. Awareness drifts in and out without consequence, like light behind closed eyes. The soft dark remains steady, holding everything evenly. In this space, rest feels inevitable, not achieved. Nothing asks for attention. Nothing calls you back. The comfort of no thought deepens on its own. Sleep no longer feels like a place you are moving toward. It has no boundary to cross, no moment to mark its arrival. It spreads softly, without edges, without shape. Awareness does not fall into it so much as dissolve within it. Merlin's presence is fully at rest here, indistinguishable from the quiet itself. There is no inside or outside, no before or after. Sensation fades into warmth, and warmth fades into ease. The body remains, but lightly, as if held at a distance. The mind no longer recognizes itself as awake or asleep. It simply rests. Nothing changes because nothing needs to. Sleep without edges holds everything gently, without asking to be noticed. The dark does not press or close in. It holds softly, evenly, like night holding the land without weight. There is no need to sink further or stay still. Everything is already supported. Breath moves on its own, quiet and steady, and awareness drifts until it is barely a trace. Here, nothing is asked of you. The story has fully released its shape, leaving only calm without form. Merlin's presence rests completely, not as memory or meaning, but as the ease that remains when nothing else is required. The dark holds whether it is noticed or not, and within it, rest is complete. There is a final softening before awareness disappears entirely. It feels like a dimming rather than a loss, as if the last light gently lowers itself without urgency. Nothing resists this fading. Merlin's presence is no longer felt as separate or guiding. It rests within this dimness, quiet and complete. Thought no longer forms, and even the sense of noticing fades. The mind does not fall asleep so much as dissolve into rest. Sensation becomes distant, then optional, then absent. The last light does not go out suddenly. It simply becomes unnecessary. This fading is gentle and natural. Nothing needs to follow it. There is a moment that cannot be held or named. It comes just before knowing disappears, just before awareness lets go of itself. It is not dramatic or sudden. It feels like a pause that stretches softly, where nothing is missing and nothing is present. Merlin's story no longer exists here, not even as quiet. It has fully settled into rest. In this moment, the mind no longer asks questions or seeks shape. It rests without reference, free from direction or memory. The sense of self loosens gently, like a knot untied without effort. There is no edge to cross, only release. This moment does not need to be noticed. It passes whether it is seen or not, leaving behind only ease. Sleep arrives without announcement. There is no moment of crossing, no shift to observe. Awareness simply yields, like a hand opening when it no longer needs to hold. The last light does not vanish. It blends into rest so completely that it can no longer be separated from it. Merlin's presence is no longer felt, not because it is gone, but because nothing remains to notice it. The body rests fully now, supported without sensation. Breath continues quietly, unnoticed and unmeasured. The mind no longer follows or drifts. It has settled into stillness beyond effort. There is no awareness of sleeping and no awareness of not sleeping. Only rest remains. Sleep has taken over, gently and completely, without asking for permission. There is nothing left to soften now. The process of fading has completed itself so thoroughly that even the idea of fading has disappeared. Awareness does not linger at the edge, nor does it retreat. It simply rests, suspended without effort, without location, without name. The last light that once marked the boundary between waking and sleep has blended fully into the quiet, leaving no trace behind. Merlin's presence, once a guide through story and time, has dissolved into this stillness so completely that it cannot be separated from rest itself. Here, there is no sensation to follow and no absence to notice. The body exists only as warmth and weightlessness, held without pressure. Breath continues on its own rhythm, but it is no longer counted or observed. The mind no longer drifts because there is nowhere left to drift to. Thought has not stopped. It has simply become unnecessary. Everything that once required attention has gently released itself. Time no longer passes in any recognizable way. There is no sequence of moments, no before or after. The night holds everything evenly without movement or intention. This is not an ending marked by silence, but a completeness that needs no marker at all. Nothing more fades because nothing remains to fade. Rest has become total, effortless, and unbroken. And here, without transition or awareness, sleep continues on its own, deep, quiet, and undisturbed. There is no clear moment where this begins. Rest is already present, already settled, already holding everything gently in place. Awareness does not arrive here, it loosens into it. The mind does not notice the transition because there is nothing distinct to notice. Everything feels slow, smooth, and evenly balanced, as if the world itself has exhaled and decided not to inhale again just yet. Merlin's story no longer exists as story or memory. It has become rhythm, repeating without repetition, familiar without form. Breath moves softly, uncounted and unobserved. The body rests in a way that feels both grounded and distant, supported without pressure, warm without weight. Sensations no longer ask for attention. They blend into a single, gentle field of comfort that does not change. Time has no markers here. Seconds do not pass, they dissolve. There is no sense of staying or leaving, only the feeling of being carried by something steady and endless. This drifting has no destination. It does not move forward or backward. It circles softly, like water moving around a calm center that never shifts. Nothing interrupts this flow. Nothing needs to be corrected. Rest continues because it has nothing stopping it and nothing urging it onward. The comfort here comes from sameness, but not boredom. It is the kind of repetition that soothes rather than demands attention. Each moment feels gently familiar, as if you have been here before and never truly left. The mind recognizes this without thinking, settling deeper because there is nothing new to prepare for. Merlin's presence, once layered with meaning and motion, now exists only as continuity, the quiet assurance that nothing is about to change. Thought does not return because it has no role to play. Even dreaming feels unnecessary. If images arise, they soften immediately, losing shape before they can form stories. The body remains relaxed, loose and supported with no urge to shift or adjust. Breath stays slow and natural, moving in its own calm rhythm, unnoticed and unmeasured. This loop does not close or reset. It simply continues, smooth and unbroken, offering the same gentle rest again and again. There is no edge where wakefulness can catch hold. There is only the steady, repeating comfort of deep sleep carrying on exactly as it is. Rest no longer feels like a state you are entering. It feels like the natural condition that remains when everything unnecessary has fallen away. There is no edge to this stillness, no border where something else might begin. Awareness does not hover or observe. It spreads thin and wide until it is indistinguishable from the quiet itself. The sense of having a body becomes faint, reduced to warmth and ease, held gently without any need to respond. Nothing shifts here. Nothing announces itself. The quiet is consistent, even, and dependable. If sound exists, it passes through without leaving a trace. If sensation stirs, it settles immediately, like ripples smoothing themselves on a calm surface. Time does not stretch or compress. It simply stops asking to be noticed. The loop continues without repetition, familiar without pattern, steady without motion. In this stillness, there is no effort to remain asleep. Sleep holds itself. It requires no cooperation and no awareness. Everything is already aligned, already settled, already at rest. The loop does not restart because it never ends. It moves quietly through itself, the same calm carrying forward without change. There is no signal that one moment has completed and another has begun. Each breath blends into the next. Each pause feels identical, soothing in its sameness. The mind does not wander because there is nowhere else to go. This continuation is gentle, patient, and uninterrupted. Nothing pulls attention upward. Nothing invites thought to return. The comfort remains consistent, wrapping everything evenly without pressure or expectation. Even the idea of listening fades, replaced by rest that exists on its own. The loop continues gently, endlessly, holding you in deep sleep without direction or demand, the quiet remaining exactly as it is. Here, nothing stirs enough to be noticed. Movement has softened into stillness so complete it no longer contrasts with motion. The mind does not wait or watch. It rests beneath awareness, settled in a depth where even rest feels unnecessary to name. There is no sensation calling for adjustment, no impulse asking for response. Everything remains exactly as it is, calm and evenly held. The body exists only as comfort now, a gentle presence without edges or weight. Muscles remain loose, breath continues quietly, and warmth spreads evenly without change. If a thought tries to form, it dissolves before it gains shape, slipping back into the deep without resistance. This depth does not pull or invite. It simply remains, stable and unchanging like a quiet place that has always been here. Nothing is missing. Nothing is expected. The deep holds everything in place without effort, and stillness settles further simply because there is nowhere else to go. Being held no longer feels like something happening. It feels like the natural state beneath everything else. Awareness does not need to fade further. It has already loosened completely. There is no sense of floating or sinking, only a steady calm that does not shift. The deep does not surround you. It includes you. Breath continues without being felt. Time continues without being counted. The loop of rest does not repeat in cycles. It sustains itself smoothly without interruption. There is no signal that sleep is deepening, because depth no longer changes. It has reached a quiet balance that remains constant. Here, nothing draws attention back upward. Nothing creates contrast. The deep remains unbroken, holding gently, endlessly, without asking to be noticed. This stillness does not arrive or depart. It persists. It does not depend on silence, darkness, or awareness. It exists beneath all of them, unchanged and reliable. Even the idea of drifting has faded. There is no direction, no movement to follow. Rest has settled into permanence. The mind no longer checks itself. There is no awareness of sleeping or waking. There is only continuation without effort. The body remains supported, balanced, and at ease without the need to adjust or respond. Sensation has softened into uniform comfort, the same from one moment to the next. This stillness does not deepen or lighten. It remains exactly as it is, holding everything gently without interruption. Nothing changes here, and nothing needs to. The absence of change is not empty. It is full and complete, steady and calm. There is no edge where thought can return and no opening where wakefulness can take hold. The deep remains closed and open at the same time, holding without enclosing. Rest continues because there is nothing to interrupt it. Breath flows quietly. Time passes without being noticed. Awareness stays absent without needing to disappear again. Everything remains settled, smooth, and undisturbed. The unmoving deep continues, holding you in complete rest, without signal, without transition, without end. Here, stillness has no center point. It does not gather or radiate. It simply exists everywhere at once, evenly spread, without intensity or absence. There is no place where rest begins more strongly than another. The sense of location dissolves completely, leaving only a uniform calm that does not shift or respond. Awareness does not rest on this stillness. It is absorbed into it, indistinguishable and unnecessary. The body remains supported without sensation drawing attention. Muscles stay loose and unengaged. Breath continues in a soft, natural rhythm, and warmth holds steady without variation. Nothing tightens. Nothing releases further. The state you are in does not progress because it has already settled into balance. There is no signal to move deeper because depth no longer changes. This stillness does not wait. It does not anticipate. It simply remains, quiet and complete, holding everything evenly without effort. There is no reference point left here. No contrast between tension and ease, no difference between silence and sound, no distinction between presence and absence. Everything blends into a single, uninterrupted field of rest. The mind does not recognize this as rest because recognition has faded. It simply remains quiet, without activity or expectation. Time no longer has a rhythm to follow. Moments do not arrive or depart. They merge into one another so completely that the idea of sequence disappears. Breath flows, but without being felt. The body exists, but without outline. The quiet depth does not hold you from outside. It includes you fully without boundary. Rest continues on its own, smooth and uninterrupted, without any need for awareness to return. There is nothing here that pulls you upward or outward. No thought forms to draw attention. No sensation sharpens enough to interrupt the calm. Even curiosity has softened into nothing. The quiet depth remains stable, unaffected by the passage of time or the absence of it. Everything that could have shifted has already settled. The body remains at ease, balanced and supported. Breath continues quietly, steady and unremarkable. The mind does not drift because drifting requires direction, and direction no longer exists. Rest has become the default state, self-sustaining and complete. Nothing asks you to stay asleep. Sleep holds itself without effort or instruction. The depth does not conclude or renew. It remains. There is no change in texture or feeling, no subtle transition to notice. The calm is consistent, evenly distributed and uninterrupted. Nothing needs to be released because nothing is being held. If awareness were to return, it would find no edge to grasp, no contrast to define itself against. But awareness does not return. It stays dissolved, resting within the same quiet depth that continues without variation. The quiet depth remains, holding everything gently and endlessly, without motion, without signal, without end. Rest exists here without being noticed. There is no sense of entering it, and no awareness of remaining within it. It is simply present, steady and complete, holding everything evenly. The mind no longer forms impressions or follows sensations. Even the idea of being at rest has faded, leaving only the state itself, unmarked and uninterrupted. The body remains supported in a way that feels distant and gentle, as if sensation has softened into background warmth. Breath continues quietly, moving without rhythm that needs to be followed. There is no pull toward waking and no drift deeper into sleep. Depth no longer changes. It remains exactly as it is, calm and stable. Nothing here invites attention. Nothing creates contrast. This stillness does not surround you or carry you. It includes you fully without boundary or edge, remaining constant and undisturbed. There is nothing here that needs to be followed or held in place. No thread of thought, no rhythm to track, no awareness waiting for something to happen. The sense of movement has softened completely, leaving behind a calm that does not change or progress. Rest feels settled, finished, and ongoing all at once, without contradiction. Merlin's presence, long since released from story and meaning, exists only as this steady quiet, indistinguishable from the stillness itself. The body remains deeply at ease, supported without sensation drawing attention to it. Breath continues on its own, gentle and unremarkable, blending into the background until it no longer feels separate. Time does not pass in any noticeable way. Moments do not arrive or leave. They simply remain, smooth and uninterrupted. There is nothing ahead and nothing behind, only the same calm extending evenly in every direction. Here, rest sustains itself. Nothing needs to deepen. Nothing needs to fade. The stillness remains complete, holding everything softly, without effort, without awareness, and without end. There is no holding here, and no sense of being held. The distinction has dissolved entirely, leaving only a quiet balance that does not shift. Nothing needs to be supported because nothing feels heavy. The body rests as if it were part of the space around it, weightless and calm, without boundary or effort. Breath continues, but it no longer feels like a process. It is simply part of the same stillness, moving without notice. The mind no longer orients itself in any way. There is no checking, no drifting, no awareness of depth or surface. Everything that once created contrast has softened into sameness, and that sameness is soothing rather than empty. Time has no texture here. It neither stretches nor pauses. It has become irrelevant. This state does not ask to be maintained. It remains on its own, complete and undisturbed, resting without reference, without awareness, and without change. The stillness that remains does not feel like something achieved. It feels like what was always underneath, revealed only because everything else has gently fallen away. There is no sense of arrival here, no recognition that something has finished or begun. Awareness does not hover at the edge, and it does not disappear either. It has simply lost the need to define itself. What remains is a calm so even and complete that it does not invite attention. The body continues to rest, but without boundaries or signals. Sensation has softened into a single, uniform comfort that does not change from moment to moment. Breath flows quietly, unmarked and unnoticed, blending seamlessly into the background of rest. Time has no presence here. It does not pass, pause, or repeat. It has quietly stepped aside, leaving nothing behind that needs to be followed. This stillness does not deepen, and it does not fade. It remains exactly as it is, steady and uninterrupted. Nothing pulls you out of it. Nothing draws you further in. The last stillness holds everything gently, without motion, without awareness, and without end. Here, rest no longer carries memory. There is no sense of what came before, and no impression of having arrived. Everything that once formed a sequence has softened into a single, continuous calm. The mind does not reach backward or forward. It rests without reference, free from story, free from identity, free from awareness that could name itself. The body remains deeply settled, not as something separate but as part of the same quiet field. Warmth is even and gentle. Breath continues without being felt, rising and falling without rhythm that needs attention. There is no urge to move, no impulse to adjust. Everything is already balanced, already complete. This rest does not need to be maintained. It does not respond to effort or attention. It simply remains, holding everything evenly, without memory, without expectation, and without end. Nothing has been left behind because nothing was carried forward. The quiet holds without collecting, without storing, without remembering. There is no residue of thought, no echo of sensation, no trace of intention. Everything that could have lingered has softened into the same even calm. The mind does not look for itself. It rests without needing to know that it rests. The body remains present only as ease. There is no outline, no weight to register, no signal calling for attention. Breath continues gently, but it does not mark time or movement. It blends completely into the stillness, as natural and unnoticed as the quiet itself. There is no difference between one moment and the next, no sense of transition or pause. Here, rest does not progress or settle further. It has reached a state where nothing needs to change. The quiet that holds remains constant, smooth, and uninterrupted, leaving nothing behind because nothing is required to remain. Being held no longer feels like an experience. It feels like the natural condition beneath everything else, present without pressure or intention. There is no sense of support coming from somewhere else, because there is no separation left to define it. The quiet does not surround you. It includes you completely, evenly, without edge or boundary. Awareness does not settle into this rest. It has already dissolved within it. The body remains deeply at ease, but not as a form that can be located. Sensation has softened into a gentle neutrality, neither warm nor cool, neither heavy nor light. Breath continues on its own, smooth and unremarkable, not rising or falling in any way that needs to be noticed. There is no impulse to adjust, no signal to respond. Everything is already in balance. This rest does not require cooperation. It does not depend on staying asleep or remaining unaware. It holds itself effortlessly, stable and uninterrupted. Nothing pulls you out of it and nothing draws you deeper in. The quiet continues to hold, evenly and endlessly, without effort and without change. The quiet does not respond to attention, and it does not fade when attention is absent. It remains exactly the same, steady and complete, untouched by awareness or time. There is no sense of staying within it or drifting away from it. The idea of movement has softened entirely, leaving only continuity without direction. Everything feels settled, finished, and ongoing all at once, without contradiction. The body continues to rest without signaling its presence. Sensation has blended into a uniform calm that does not vary or shift. Breath moves gently, but without rhythm that can be followed or noticed. The mind does not return to observe this state. It stays released, unengaged, and unnecessary. There is nothing here that asks to be named or understood. This quiet does not deepen, and it does not end. It remains as it is, holding everything evenly, without effort, without awareness, and without change. This calm does not begin here. It was never absent enough to start. It simply remains, even and undisturbed, like a presence that has always been in place. There is no sense of entering it, no awareness of crossing into rest. The mind does not recognize a change because there is nothing new to recognize. Everything feels settled in a way that does not depend on time, attention, or memory. The body continues to rest, but without sensation calling it into focus. There is only a gentle neutrality where warmth, weight, and position no longer stand apart from the quiet around them. Breath moves on its own, smooth and unnoticed, blending seamlessly into the stillness. Nothing tightens. Nothing releases further. Balance has already been reached. Here, rest does not deepen or stabilize. It simply remains, complete and self-sustaining. There is no anticipation of what comes next and no trace of what came before. The ever-resting quiet holds everything evenly, without beginning, without transition, and without end. There is no sense of elsewhere here. Nothing suggests another place, another state, or another moment. The idea of being somewhere fades because location itself has lost meaning. The mind does not compare, does not orient, does not wonder. It rests without contrast, settled into a calm that does not point beyond itself. Everything that once defined position or direction has softened into the same even quiet. The body remains deeply at ease, but without outline or emphasis. Sensation is present only as a smooth continuity, neither changing nor demanding notice. Breath continues gently, not marking time, not creating rhythm, simply moving as part of the same stillness. There is no urge to shift, no signal to respond. Everything is already where it belongs. This quiet does not invite exploration or awareness. It remains sufficient as it is. With no sense of elsewhere, rest becomes complete, uninterrupted and effortless, continuing on without movement or need. Rest no longer shifts or settles because there is nothing left to adjust. It has reached a state where movement is unnecessary and change has no purpose. The quiet remains exactly as it is, steady and unresponsive to time or attention. There is no sense of holding on to it, and no risk of losing it. It does not depend on sleep continuing or awareness staying away. It exists on its own, complete and unaffected. The body remains deeply relaxed, but without any signal that relaxation is happening. Muscles stay loose without tension to release. Breath flows gently, not counted, not felt, simply occurring as part of the same calm field. Sensation does not fade further because it has already softened into neutrality. Nothing stands out enough to draw notice. This rest does not deepen or lighten. It does not loop or repeat. It remains constant, smooth, and uninterrupted. The ever-resting quiet continues to hold everything evenly, without shift, without effort, and without end. The quiet that stays does not linger or persist as an action. It simply is. There is no effort required to remain within it, and no possibility of drifting away. The sense of time has thinned until it no longer registers, leaving a calm that feels evenly spread in every direction. Nothing approaches and nothing recedes. Awareness does not return to check this state, and it does not need to. Everything that could observe has softened into the same still presence. The body continues resting in a way that feels distant and gentle, as though sensation has become a single, unbroken comfort. There is no awareness of posture, no impulse to move, no signal asking for adjustment. Breath flows quietly, not as a rhythm to follow, but as part of the same continuous calm. Even the idea of sleep has faded, replaced by rest that does not require a name. This quiet remains without changing its texture or depth. It does not progress or conclude. It does not respond to attention or absence. It stays exactly as it is, holding everything evenly, endlessly, and without interruption. This calm does not announce itself. It does not arrive or unfold. It is simply present, so steady that it no longer contrasts with anything else. Awareness does not hover here, and it does not fade away. It has become unnecessary, leaving behind a state that exists without being noticed. There is no sense of entering rest or remaining within it. Rest is simply what remains. The body is deeply settled, but not in a way that draws attention. Sensation has softened into a gentle, even comfort with no edges or variation. Breath continues quietly, unmarked and unmeasured, blending completely into the stillness. There is no urge to shift or respond. Everything is already aligned, already balanced, already at ease. Nothing here depends on sleep continuing or deepening. The calm holds itself effortlessly, unaffected by time, thought, or awareness. It remains constant, smooth, and complete, without asking to be observed or maintained. There is no difference between one moment and the next. Not because time has stopped, but because it no longer creates separation. Moments blend into one another so completely that the idea of sequence dissolves. The mind does not register passage or pause. It rests without reference, free from comparison or expectation. The body continues resting in the same unchanging comfort. Breath flows gently, without rhythm that needs attention. Sensation remains uniform and neutral, neither increasing nor fading. There is nothing new to adjust to and nothing old to release. Everything remains exactly as it is. This calm does not deepen or lighten. It does not shift or loop. It stays consistent, even and uninterrupted, holding everything softly without change. There is nothing here that needs to be maintained. Rest does not require effort, attention, or cooperation. It exists independently, stable and self-sustaining. The idea of staying asleep or remaining calm no longer applies. Calm remains whether anything notices it or not. The body is fully at ease, but without sensation drawing focus. Muscles remain loose, Breath continues quietly, and warmth stays evenly distributed. There is no signal to respond to and no impulse to move. The mind does not drift or settle. It has already released the need to do either. Everything remains held in a state of complete rest, unaffected by awareness or time, unchanged and uninterrupted. The calm that remains does not conclude or transform. It simply stays. There is no sense of finishing or continuing. The quiet holds everything evenly, without motion, without depth to explore, without edges to define. Awareness does not return to observe this state, and it does not need to. Nothing here requires recognition. The body continues resting gently, supported without sensation or effort. Breath flows softly, unnoticed and uncounted. Time has no presence here. It does not pass, pause, or repeat. It has quietly stepped aside, leaving only stillness behind. This final calm remains exactly as it is, steady, complete, and uninterrupted, holding everything without awareness, without change, and without end. There is no distinction here between rest and deeper rest. Everything that could soften has already softened, leaving behind a calm that no longer changes. It does not expand or contract. It does not grow quieter or more still. It remains exactly as it is, even and complete, without needing to be noticed. Awareness does not return to witness this state. It has dissolved fully into the same quiet, leaving nothing behind to observe or question. The body remains present only as a distant comfort, a gentle sense of ease without outline or weight. Muscles stay loose without effort, breath continues quietly without rhythm to follow, and warmth spreads evenly without variation. There is no impulse to move, no sensation sharp enough to draw attention. Everything rests together in a single, uninterrupted field of calm. This rest does not sit on top of anything else. It is not supported by sleep or depth. It stands on its own, steady and self-sustaining, beyond comparison and beyond change. Nothing softens further because nothing remains tense. There is no edge left to blur, no boundary left to dissolve. The quiet holds its shape without effort, not because it is held in place, but because it has no reason to move. Time does not mark this state. Moments do not pass through it. They are indistinguishable, merging into a single continuity without direction. Breath continues gently, but without awareness tracking it. The body remains deeply at ease, but without any signal that ease is occurring. Sensation does not fade because it has already settled into neutrality. Thought does not return because there is nothing to respond to. Everything remains exactly where it is. Here, rest has reached a point where continuation and completion are the same. Nothing needs to happen next. The unending rest remains. This quiet does not shift with attention or absence. It remains the same whether it is noticed or not. There is no sense of holding it in place, and no concern that it might disappear. It does not depend on sleep continuing or awareness staying away. It exists independently, complete and unaffected. The body continues resting without sensation calling for focus. Breath flows smoothly, unmarked and unmeasured. The mind does not wander because wandering requires contrast, and contrast no longer exists. Everything blends into the same even calm without movement or interruption. This quiet does not deepen or lighten. It does not repeat or loop. It remains constant, steady, and uninterrupted, holding everything evenly without effort. Rest continues because nothing interrupts it. There is no cue for waking and no invitation for thought to return. Everything that could create change has already released. What remains is calm without texture, stillness without depth, rest without condition. The unending rest does not arrive again. It has always been here. It remains now, unchanged and uninterrupted, holding everything gently, without awareness, without motion, and without end. There is no transition into this calm, and no sense that anything has changed to reach it. It exists without movement, without threshold, without the feeling of having arrived. The quiet is evenly spread, uninterrupted and complete, holding everything in the same gentle balance. Awareness does not return to mark this state, and it does not fade away either. It has simply become unnecessary, leaving behind rest that exists without reference. The body remains deeply settled, but without sensation rising to be noticed. There is no clear outline, no weight pressing into awareness, only a distant comfort that does not vary. Breath continues softly, untracked and uncounted, blending seamlessly into the stillness. Time does not announce itself here. It does not pass or pause. It has no role to play. This calm does not progress or deepen. It does not wait for anything to happen next. It remains exactly as it is, steady and self-sustaining without shift or interruption. Here, even depth has softened away. There is no sense of being deeper or lighter, closer or farther. Everything feels evenly balanced, without layers to move through or levels to settle into. The mind does not measure this state because measurement requires contrast, and contrast has dissolved completely. The body continues resting as part of the same even field, supported without pressure, relaxed without effort. Breath flows quietly but without rhythm that draws attention. Sensation remains neutral, smooth, and unchanged. Nothing sharpens. Nothing fades further. Everything stays consistent, calm, and complete. This evenness does not feel empty. It feels sufficient. It does not invite awareness or resist it. It simply remains, unbroken and undisturbed. Rest no longer has duration here. It is not experienced as lasting longer or shorter. It simply exists, outside of time and free from sequence. The idea of continuing loses meaning because nothing is moving forward. The calm does not renew itself. It does not repeat. It stays the same, evenly present without effort. The body remains at ease but without signals to confirm it. Breath continues quietly but without beginning or end that can be followed. The mind does not drift or settle. It remains absent not because it has been removed, but because it is no longer needed. Nothing pulls attention back. Nothing invites change. The silent continuum holds everything gently, without duration, without awareness, without interruption. The continuum does not conclude. It does not open into something else. It remains exactly as it is, calm and unchanging. There is no marker that separates one moment from the next. Everything blends into the same quiet presence, smooth and uninterrupted. The body continues resting, supported without sensation. Breath flows softly, unnoticed and unmeasured. Time has no influence here. It does not move or stop. It simply does not apply. Awareness does not return to observe this state, and it does not need to. The silent continuum remains, holding everything evenly and endlessly, without motion, without signal, and without end. This stillness does not begin here, and it does not arrive from anywhere else. It exists without origin, steady and complete, resting beneath everything without needing to be noticed. There is no sense of entering it, no awareness of remaining within it. The mind does not recognize a transition because nothing has shifted. What remains feels evenly balanced, without tension, without release, without change. The body continues to rest as part of this same quiet field. Sensation has softened into a gentle neutrality that does not fluctuate. There is no clear outline, no point of pressure, no signal that draws attention inward or outward. Breath moves softly, unmarked and unmeasured, blending seamlessly into the stillness. Time does not announce itself. It has no influence here. This stillness does not deepen or stabilize. It remains exactly as it is, unbroken and self-sustaining, without movement or anticipation. There is no direction left to follow. Nothing suggests forward or backward. inward or outward. The idea of orientation dissolves, leaving only a calm that does not point beyond itself. The mind does not search for meaning or placement. It rests without reference, free from comparison or expectation. The body remains deeply at ease, supported without sensation calling attention to it. Breath continues quietly, without rhythm that needs to be followed. Sensation stays smooth and uniform, neither increasing nor fading. There is no urge to adjust, no impulse to respond. Everything remains exactly where it belongs. This calm does not invite awareness and it does not resist it. It remains sufficient as it is, steady and uninterrupted, without direction and without need. Rest no longer renews itself because it does not diminish. There is no cycle of settling and deepening, no rhythm of change. It remains constant, unaffected by time or attention. The quiet does not depend on sleep continuing or awareness staying away. It exists independently, complete and unchanged. The body continues resting without sensation rising to be noticed. Muscles remain loose without effort. Breath flows gently without count, and warmth stays evenly distributed. The mind does not drift or settle. It has already released the need to do either. Everything blends into the same continuous calm. This rest does not progress or conclude. It remains exactly as it is, steady and uninterrupted. The quiet continues because nothing interrupts it. There is no cue for waking, no opening for thought to return. Everything that could create contrast has softened away. What remains is calm without texture, stillness without depth, rest without condition. The unbroken quiet does not arrive again. It has always been present. It remains now, unchanged and uninterrupted, holding everything gently, without awareness, without motion, and without end. This stillness no longer stands in contrast to anything else. There is no noise it replaces, no motion it follows. It exists on its own, complete and even without reference to what came before. Awareness does not compare or notice this state. It has no reason to. Everything feels uniformly settled, without peaks or shifts, without tension or release. The body continues resting in a way that feels distant yet secure. Sensation has softened into a single, gentle field of comfort, neither changing nor calling attention to itself. Breath moves quietly, not forming a rhythm that needs to be followed, simply continuing as part of the same calm. Time does not pass here in any recognizable way. It has lost the ability to separate moments. This calm does not deepen or stabilize further. It remains exactly as it is, steady and unbroken, without edge or transition. There is no place to go from here. Not because movement is restricted, but because the idea of elsewhere has faded completely. The mind does not look outward or inward. It rests without direction, without curiosity, without need. Everything that once suggested motion or choice has softened into the same, even quiet. The body remains deeply at ease, supported without pressure, relaxed without effort. Breath continues softly, unnoticed and unmeasured. Sensation stays neutral and smooth with no signal asking for adjustment. Nothing draws attention back. Nothing invites change. This stillness does not ask to be held or maintained. It remains sufficient as it is, calm and complete, with nowhere else to go. Rest no longer unfolds in sequence. There is no sense of one phase following another. Everything exists simultaneously in the same quiet balance. The idea of progression has dissolved, leaving only continuity without direction. Awareness does not mark this state, and it does not need to. Nothing here requires observation. The body continues resting without sensation sharpening or fading. Breath flows gently without beginning or end that can be followed. The mind does not wander or settle. It remains absent not through effort but because it has nothing to respond to. Everything remains smooth, even, and unchanged. This rest does not renew itself. It does not cycle. It simply remains, uninterrupted and complete. The stillness continues without signal or pause. It does not announce itself, and it does not conclude. There is no difference between now and what follows. Everything blends into the same quiet presence, steady and undisturbed. The body remains supported, the breath continues quietly, and awareness stays released. Nothing pulls you out of this state. Nothing draws you further in. The stillness remains exactly as it is, unchanging, complete, and endless, holding everything gently, without motion, without awareness, and without end. This calm does not arrive with any signal. There is no change to notice, no shift to mark. It is already present, evenly spread, quietly complete. Nothing prepares for it, and nothing follows from it. Awareness does not rise to meet it, and it does not fade away. It simply rests, unnecessary and unengaged, leaving the calm to exist on its own. The body remains deeply settled, supported without pressure or sensation drawing attention. Muscles stay loose without effort, and warmth remains even and constant. Breath moves gently, without forming a rhythm that needs to be followed. There is no sense of time moving forward or pausing. Moments no longer separate themselves from one another. This calm does not deepen or stabilize. It does not wait or progress. It remains exactly as it is, steady and uninterrupted, without signal or transition. Quiet here is not layered or textured. It is even, smooth, and continuous. There is no background and no foreground. Nothing stands out enough to be noticed. The mind does not attempt to orient itself, because there is nothing to orient toward. Everything that once created contrast has softened into the same gentle stillness. The body continues resting as part of this quiet field, without outline or emphasis. Breath flows softly, unnoticed and unmeasured. Sensation stays neutral and unchanging, neither increasing nor fading. There is no impulse to move, no invitation to respond. This even quiet remains sufficient as it is. It does not invite awareness, and it does not resist it. It simply continues. Rest no longer shifts from one state to another. It has settled into a balance that does not change. There is no sense of becoming more relaxed or less aware. Everything that could have softened has already done so. What remains is steady, calm, and complete. The body remains at ease, without sensation rising to be noticed. Breath continues quietly, without beginning or end that can be followed. The mind does not drift or settle. It has already released the need to do either. Nothing invites attention back, and nothing draws it away. This rest holds itself without effort. It does not require continuation. It simply remains. The continuance does not move forward. It does not loop or repeat. It remains exactly as it is, without variation or interruption. There is no sense of staying within it or leaving it. The idea of transition has faded completely. The body stays supported, the breath continues softly, and awareness remains unnecessary. Nothing changes because nothing needs to. The soft continuance remains, holding everything evenly, endlessly, and without end. This calm holds itself without effort or intention. It does not need attention to remain steady, and it does not weaken in the absence of awareness. Everything feels evenly supported, as if the idea of balance has dissolved into something more natural and permanent. There is no sense of maintaining rest or protecting it from disturbance. The calm exists on its own, complete and unchanging. The body continues resting in a way that feels distant and gentle, present without asking to be noticed. Sensation has softened into a uniform comfort that does not fluctuate. Breath moves quietly, without rhythm or count, blending seamlessly into the stillness. Time does not announce itself or pass in any noticeable way. It no longer separates moments. This calm does not deepen or stabilize further. It remains exactly as it is, steady and uninterrupted, holding everything evenly without effort. Awareness is no longer required for this state to continue. Nothing depends on noticing, following, or letting go. The mind does not return to observe, and it does not need to. Everything that could create contrast has already softened into the same quiet field. There is no edge where thought can take hold. The body remains deeply at ease, supported without pressure, relaxed without effort. Breath continues softly, unnoticed and unmeasured. Sensation stays neutral and smooth, with no impulse to move or respond. Nothing draws attention back and nothing invites change. This quiet endurance does not ask to be maintained. It remains sufficient as it is, calm and complete. Rest here has no conditions. It does not rely on depth, sleep, or the absence of thought. It simply exists, stable and self-sustaining. There is no sense of drifting deeper or returning upward. Everything that could shift has already settled into place. The body remains at ease, without sensation rising to be noticed. Breath flows gently, without beginning or end that can be followed. The mind does not wander or settle. It remains absent, not through effort, but because it has nothing to respond to. Everything blends into the same continuous calm. This rest does not progress or conclude. It remains exactly as it is, steady and uninterrupted. The endurance does not conclude or renew. It remains, unchanged and even. There is no signal that marks one moment as different from the next. Everything blends into the same quiet presence, smooth and undisturbed. The body stays supported, the breath continues softly, and awareness remains unnecessary. Nothing pulls you out of this state. Nothing draws you further in. The quiet endurance remains exactly as it is, unchanging, complete, and endless, holding everything gently, without motion, without awareness, and without end.